Welcome to another episode, everyone. The Black P. Stones and the Rukns of Chicago were involved in a dark, deadly war, orchestrated and perpetrated allegedly by one Jeff Fort, who ultimately paid a hefty price for his involvement. First, the Black P. Stones were all one group, and then they broke up. And a war ensued and many people lost their lives. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Woodlawn neighborhood of Southside Chicago. The neighborhood stretches from East 60th to 67th on the south and between MLK and South Stony on the east. But for this video, we start off way before it was called MLK Drive. In the 1940s, Woodlawn was considered a prestigious area. The neighborhood was filled with beautiful three-story homes. In fact, one of the nation's top universities is located right in the heart of Woodlawn. Needless to say, Woodlawn was a very exclusive community, even by law. Only citizens of white descent could live in Woodlawn since the very start. However, in 1948, the Supreme Court struck down the redlining laws and anyone could now live in the neighborhood. So for whatever reason, the residents were furious and nearly half of them left for the suburbs. By 1952, the Woodlawn area was 50% African American, and because of the change, some of the locals who remained in the area wanted to prove a point. Essentially, all of the wealthy residents had departed, and what was left was the lower income community known as the Greasers. The Greaser subculture was pretty much a collection of all of the less fortunate Greek, Italian, and Eastern European teens. And in Woodlawn, a group called the Rebels took control of the area starting in 1952. The Rebels' main territory was the back of the yards area, but they expanded to Woodlawn as well. The Woodlawn Rebel membership was only around 30 people. However, these guys were rough and territorial, especially towards the new residents. So eventually, the new residents got together and decided that enough was enough. In 1954, the community joined together and called themselves the Blackstone Raiders. The Blackstone name was chosen because they hung out and operated on South Blackstone Ave. Right off the bat, the Raiders and Rebels were getting into it. However, it wasn't taken to serious heights for the first few years. But sadly, that wouldn't last forever. The Rebels began getting frustrated by the increasing numbers of the Blackstone Raiders. Essentially, their numbers were dwindling while the other side was gaining numbers exponentially. So as a last resort, the Rebels decided to send an unfortunate message. March 11th, 1957. The Rebels get word that the Raiders are hanging out on 59th and Kenzie in Gage Park. So the Rebels get in their car and head to the intersection. There, they see a member named Alvin Palmer on the corner. So the Rebels jump out of the car and surround him. Instantly after this, the Raiders would inform Chicago police and 11 rebels would go down. This is a very important moment in Southside Chicago history. It was the moment where the community knew that they were vulnerable and needed protection. So naturally, some leaders would step up to the plate. And that takes us back 2 years. In 1955, two new families moved to Woodlawn. First, the wealthy Hairston family bought a large 3-story house in Woodlawn. This was a professional family that owned various houses all over the city. And that same year, another family moved in just a few blocks down. That would be the Fort family from the small town of Aberdeen, Mississippi. This family was not so wealthy and definitely had a much different reputation. However, despite their differences, the Fort and Hairston families became the best of friends. Well, both families coincidentally had sons of the same age, Jeff Fort and Eugene Hairston, both of which were natural leaders. Well, after the passing of their classmate Alvin Palmer, they both wanted to step up to the plate. And here's how it played out. Because Jeff Fort lived on South Blackstone, he naturally joined the Blackstone Raiders and started leading them in 1957. On the other hand, Eugene Hairston got together with his friends and started the Harper's Boys. The name originated from their main location, Harper Street in between 63rd and 64th. Well, during the first year, the Harpers and Raiders had the same mission, to deal with the Rebels. And quickly, the Rebels were run out of Woodlawn by 1959. So now with the Rebels gone, it became a competition between the Raiders and Harpers, who was the most powerful in Woodlawn. In 1960, the Harper's Boys and Blackstone Raiders fought over territory, specifically 63rd and Stony Island. However, by the end of 1960,
Isn't that how they always start? That's how a lot of these gangs start. You want to protect your territory, protect your neighborhood. You're being bullied. And a lot of gang members start gang banging because they're looking for direction and protection. And a lot of gangs are started in a neighborhood because other gangs or other individuals are coming and trying to abuse the people of a certain neighborhood. And so they form a gang. This has happened many times. They form a gang in order to protect themselves. But here we have a situation where apparently the Blackstone Raiders were going at it with the rebels. One of them get killed, a Blackstone Raider. Jeff Fort ends up coming around, and now here we go. He's about to turn them into something else other than some Blackstone Raiders who are afraid to stand up to these rebels. Just the opposite. They ended up running the rebels out of town within a couple of years, apparently. But now, of course, they're beefing with one another, the Harper boys and the Blackstone Raiders. This is how it always goes. Just got finished beefing with this one group, ran them out. You were successful with the beef. You came out on top, and now here you are beefing with one another. No one can ever get on the same accord.
Fort and Hairston families learned about what was going on. So because of this, Jeff and Eugene sat down and decided to end the rivalry then and there. Then Eugene suggested that they join together as one. So that's exactly what happened. Both sides created a giant force known as the Blackstone Rangers. The name was chosen by Jeff, and Eugene was upset because he wanted the Harpers to be incorporated as well. So as a compromise, Eugene became the official leader of the Blackstone Rangers. Together, Jeff and Eugene had the mission of spreading the Blackstone Rangers everywhere. Their plan was to recruit young members, preferably under 17. This way, if they got caught, they wouldn't face serious time. So in order to do this, Jeff and Eugene would visit the local schools, churches, and youth hangouts. This was mostly Jeff Fort's idea, as he was a far better recruiter than Eugene. His first mission was to take over the South Shore neighborhood. To do this, he was known to make frequent visits to the First Presbyterian Church on 64th and Kimbark. Well, long story short, the recruiting worked like magic, and the Blackstone Rangers began taking over Chicago. Eugene covered the north side while Jeff covered the south side. By 1964, the two started recruiting in the suburbs as well. But these aren't your typical suburbs. Anything south of Chicago is just as wild as the city. So the Blackstone Rangers went to Harvey, Chicago Heights, and Markham to recruit successfully. Well, now it's 1966, and the Blackstone Rangers are active in every part of Chicago. So you might be wondering how they made money, and this isn't your usual story. Jeff Fort was very close with the old mafia bosses in Chicago, and he used their old tactics. Essentially,
used their old tactics. Extortion. They're going to churches to recruit individuals to join the gang, and that's what happens when these gangs start. They don't care who they get to join the gang because they're looking for numbers. And so, essentially, they will accept anyone.
Taxed everyone who was making money in Southside Chicago. To do this, he would approach a local business and ask them for a monthly fee, and if they refused, bad things would come their way. Everyone was afraid of Jeff Fort, so they all paid his simple tax. This is how he took over Southside Chicago in the early 1960s. Well, in 1966, he decided to rename the Blackstone Rangers to the Black P Stones. The P represented peace, prosperity, people, and power. However, peace wasn't exactly what the Black P Stones were all about. Let me explain. In 1966, the Black Disciples and Black P Stones started bumping heads. The Black Disciples were led by a man named David Barksdale, also known as King David, and this guy was just as wild as Jeff Fort. So instantly, the rivalry resulted in members falling on both sides. It got so bad that Chicago police started a unit dedicated to the BDs versus the Black P Stones. Essentially, the mayor wanted to arrest his way out of the problem. However, at the same time, the president had a completely different idea. Listen to this. While Chicago police were trying to take down the Stones and Disciples, President Lyndon B. Johnson gave them $1 million. I know this doesn't sound real, but check this out. In 1967, President Johnson started the Government Office of Equal Opportunity. The idea was to funnel millions of dollars into America's worst neighborhoods. And due to their political connections, Jeff Fort and David Barksdale received $937,000. The money was dedicated to a new organization called TWO, also known as the Woodlawn Organization. Essentially, the money was dedicated to helping bring peace in Woodlawn by way of job training. So
That's a lot of money. That's probably about 5 million in today's time, that 1 million back then. So this sort of sounds like the GRID program of Los Angeles, where they get these gang members and pay them money to help squash the gang beefs going on in these gang territories in Los Angeles. They give them money for the youth, supposedly for the youth, and for programs, after school programs and such. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not a part of the program, but they have a GRID program as an intervention to help gang members there in Los Angeles. Apparently, this program here was along those lines, where they gave these individuals $1 million to help bring peace, if you will, in the community. But look at all of the beefs that these individuals are having. The Blackstone Rangers, they are having beefs from the beginning. The Rebels, the Harper Boys, until they decided to come together. And then now the Black Disciples, and there are a lot of bodies dropping on both sides. But now it looks like they've come together to get this $1 million to bring peace into the community. Let's see if that is exactly what transpired or not.
Jeff Fort was given the task of job training for the youth. You can't make this up. Yes, the man who recruited teens to join the street life received $1 million to train the youth. That may seem like not that much money, but that's equivalent to $8 million today. You may be wondering how this happened, so let me set the context. At the time, Jeff Fort was being praised by politicians for his community work. A senator named Charles Percy publicly praised him as an intelligent leader. Meanwhile, in the streets of Chicago, Jeff Fort was wreaking havoc on the Black Disciples. Well, at a certain point, David Barksdale was fed up with the nonsense and he wanted to prove that it was all a facade. So in 1968, David contacted Chicago police and asked them to follow him in unmarked cars. His plan was to drive through the Black P. Stones territory to show what will happen. And of course, Chicago police agreed. May 8th, 1968, David Barksdale hops in his car with the undercover detectives following him. He rolls through 65th and Ellis, and there, two men on the corner notice him. And without hesitation, bam! Thankfully, everyone was okay, but this definitely proved to Chicago police that the job training and truce were a complete sham. However, the program was a federal ordeal, so Chicago police could do nothing about it. The incident did nothing at all to stop the Black P. Stones, and in all honesty, I'm not sure that Chicago police cared. However, that would change in 1970. August 14th, 1970. On the corner of Stony Island and 67th, there's a massive hotel called the Southmore. Behind the hotel is a back alley, and this is a known meetup spot where the BDs and Black P. Stones chunk 'em. Well, on this August 14th night, the Stones and Disciples meet up in the alley and get it going. After a few minutes, the commotion causes the hotel to call 911. That means that Officer James Alfaro is on his way. He arrives to the scene and gets out of his car. Little does he know a Black P. Stone named Charles Edward Bay is on the roof of a nearby building. This incident caught the attention of the federal government and they started looking into Jeff Fort. But oddly enough, Jeff Fort was invited to Richard Nixon's 1970 inauguration. That's how tied in he was to the political world. Meanwhile, the FBI were investigating his every move. They were tracking his calls, having spies take pictures, and following his bank accounts. However, they couldn't get him for anything. He talked in codes and never discussed Chicago street activities on the phone. So instead, they would try to get him for something else. And that takes us to 1972. After a year-long investigation, Jeff Fort was arrested for misusing federal funds. The feds alleged that he was pocketing money and that the job training was a complete sham. However, it is important to hear out both sides. The Jeff Fort side says that there was no theft, rather he just wasn't educated on how to manage payrolls. Therefore, mistakes were made on accident, and that's why he kept some of the money. On top of this, his lawyers showed that Jeff only got his hands on 30% of the money. Either way, Fed cases are hard to beat, and Jeff Fort received 5 years. This 4-year stint was very important for Jeff's trajectory. During this time, he learned about a new religion and ended up converting to Islam. So in 1974, he changed his name to Malik.
That's cold. That's how they do it. Then gave him money, $1 million. Well, I guess he split the million, was, ended up being $8 million in today's time. So basically $4 million. I guess he split it with the other guy, David Barksdale, the leader of the Black Disciples. And whatever, they gave him the money and then locked him up for 5 years, gave him a 5-year sentence for misappropriating the funds that they gave him. Wow, because they couldn't get him for anything else. So he ends up going to prison and converting to Islam. Let's see what happens now. So he went from the Blackstone Raiders to the Black Peace Stones. He wanted to change the name. They were not necessarily happy about that, but they went along with it. Now he's in jail. How did the Rukns come about? Jeff Fort? Oh, this is crazy.
Abdul Kaaba. But to keep things simple, I'll continue to call him Jeff Fort. Anyways, after his release in 1976, Jeff was a changed man. He moved to Milwaukee to join the Moorish Science Temple. Well, after 2 years in Milwaukee, Jeff Fort missed his old life. So he moved back to Chicago to lead the Black Peace Stones once again. Except this time he wanted to change the name to El Rukn, meaning cornerstones in Arabic. Well, everyone in the Black Peace Stones didn't take well to this change. In fact, the vast majority rejected it. So this is when they split apart into two sides. The Black Peace Stones led by Eugene Hairston and the El Rukns led by Jeff Fort. The El Rukns had very strict rules. Firstly, members could not drink, smoke, eat pork, or even use foul language. Jeff also wanted his members to learn Arabic as well, but this wasn't.
I don't think it's the El Rukns. I think it's the El Rukn. So, okay. Jeff Fort then got out of prison. We're keeping up, and after doing a 4-year bid out of the 5 years or something like that, over that misappropriation of that $1 million or $500,000 or what have you. Now he's out of prison. Now he wants to change the name to the El Rukns or El Rukn. And the members did not want to go along with that, the vast majority of them, so they broke off. And many members, of course, went with Jeff Fort, and now they're the El Rukns, and you still have the Black Peace Stones, which Jeff Fort had started too, and had changed the name from the Blackstone Raiders to the Black Peace Stones. But now they didn't broke up because they didn't want to change the name again, the actual members now. And now they're about to go to war. The El Rukns and the Black Peace Stones that Jeff Fort started are about to go to a vicious, deadly war.
A rule. So you would expect this organization to be devout and dedicated to a new way of life. But unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily the case. Witnesses and former members say that the El Rukns abided by none of these rules and were constantly partying at local clubs. On top of this, they were engaged in the worst rivalry yet. So let me break it down. After the split, the Black Peace Stones and El Rukns became bitter rivals. It's safe to say that Jeff Fort and the El Rukns became the bullies of Southside Chicago. And that takes us to August 8th, 1980. The Black Peace Stones own and operate a building called Alhambra on 64th and Kenwood. This is where they keep their money and hold important meetings. 3 specific leaders operate this building: Willie Bibbs, also known as Dollar Bill, Duke Thomas, and Barnett Hall. Well, Jeff Fort wants to take over the building. So he and a dozen El Rukns drive over to 64th and Kenwood. Jeff knocks hard on the door until the Stones come down. He then demands they hand over everything in their possession and allow him to take over the building. So the El Rukns run inside the building and steal everything, including $15,000 cash from Duke Thomas and Barnett Hall. This became a common theme, the El Rukns bullying everyone in Southside Chicago. And Jeff Fort kept sending messages to the Black Peace Stones in 1981. June 15th, 1981. Jeff Fort sends 17-year-old Earl Hawkins to take out Dollar Bill. So Earl Hawkins drives to the Fountainhead Lounge on East 43rd. He gets out of his car, walks in, and right there is Dollar Bill. So without hesitation, bam! This incident was a big deal because El Rukn were completely out of control and had lost all morality. The madness would continue. December 23rd, 1981. Jeff Fort sends 2 members, Derek Keys and Anthony Hall, to take out Stones member Barnett Hall. So they drive to his apartment on South Kenwood Ave, and there they wait for him to come outside. Bam! Bang.
Bang. Whoa. allegedly, Jeff Fort is out here sending out hits. These dudes out here dropping members of his former gang, the Blackstone, the gang he started. Just because he wanted to change the name to the El Rukns, these individuals didn't want to go along with that, or whoever did not. The ones that did, they did. The ones that didn't, they stayed Blackstone, and now they have a bitter rivalry going on, and clearly a very deadly one. Wow.
Rukns was handing it to the Stones so badly that members were quitting by the day and joining the more powerful vice lords. It became extremely dangerous to be associated with the Blackstones. So essentially, the 1980s were the downfall of the Blackstones. The major reason why El Rukns was so dominant is because of how Jeff Fort was running them. He was an expert at intimidation and working with jurors, judges, and politicians to get his way. On the other hand, Eugene Hairston operated the Stones like a regular street organization. So because of this, the El Rukns could do 10 things and never be convicted. But if the Stones got caught for the smallest thing, they would face serious time. However, this trend would reverse when Jeff Fort stepped out of the Chicago lane. In 1983, while doing business out of state, Jeff Fort was arrested and sentenced to 13 years. He was sent to Florence Supermax in rural Colorado, one of the most secure and monitored facilities in the world. While there, Jeff Fort was somehow still running the El Rukns and communicating with his members. He even began communicating with the Libyan government. So in 1986, he ordered 4 members to meet with the Libyan leaders. The deal was that El Rukns would receive $2.5 million to commit acts for the foreign government. Well, of course, the FBI was all over this, so Jeff Fort was quickly caught and given an extra 80 years on his sentence. But yet, this would not stop the El...
Hey, 80 years? Treason, I take it. So he sent his boys to go get $2.5 million to commit acts against America, I suppose. For this foreign country. Oh, man, gave him 80 years. Whoa. He had 13 years. 80X Florence. Somehow he's still able to communicate and run a gang from a maximum security prison like 80X Florence, one of the worst in the world, where they hold El Chapo now. He was there. He had 13 years. And ended up getting 80 more years. Oh, wow.
Rukns madness. And that takes us to September of 1988. By this time, Jeff Fort and the top 4 El Rukns members were gone, and that meant that the Blackstones could make their way back to the south side. Jeff Fort knew that all of his power was slipping away. On top of this, it infuriated him that Eugene Hairston was free and back running the south side. September 20th, 1988. Eugene Hairston is hanging out outside his apartment. That would be the Ida Wells housing project on the south side. 3 a.m. While standing outside, 2 men walk up to him. Bang!
Bang! Damn! They taking down leaders. He was the leader, Eugene Hairston. The other dude was the leader. They take, whoa. Jeff Fort is locked up at this time. Hell, he got 90-something years.
Right away, everyone in Chicago had the idea that Jeff Fort ordered this. However, the El Rukns members denied it, claiming that Jeff wouldn't do this to his childhood friend. Either way, Jeff Fort was charged for the incident in late October. However, after lack of evidence, they dropped the case. Instead, they charged him with the 1981 passing of Willie Dollar Bill Bibbs. So because of this, he was given an extra 75 years on top of his 80. This was officially the end of El Rukns and Jeff Fort. They were simply too wild and destructive for their own good, and it ended up being their downfall. To this day, some people still see Jeff Fort as a positive hero of the community. This is crazy to me, but I'm always open to hearing both sides. Every story has 2 sides, and we often just accept the written story as a true fact, and that's not always the case. Well, after the end of El Rukns, the Blackstones rose back to the top. Since the 1990s, the Stones have been active all over Chicago, from Little Village to the north side, the south side, and all over the surrounding suburbs. If you're interested in learning more, I highly...
Wow, shout out to Swamp Stories. So, wow. Whoa, apparently That's how the Black P. Stones rose back to prominence. It's when Jeff Fort went down. According to this narration, while he was out running the street in the El Rukns, he was giving the Black P. Stones, or the El Rukns were giving the Black P. Stones absolute hell. And many of them began to turn to the Vice Lords and join that organization, saying that their organization, the Black P. Stones, were too weak to go up against the El Rukns, even though they were all, again, once all in the same gang. They had to have been friends killing friends. They were all just together, even though it was a very huge gang. Maybe some of them didn't all, know each other like that, but they were once in the same gang. Now they didn't broke off and started killing each other. But as soon as Jeff Fort went down, Black P. Stone rose back to prominence. Wow, that's deep right there. Jeff Fort got an extra 80 years after having a 13-year sentence, got an extra 80 years, and then ended up getting 75 more years. And he said after Jeff Fort gets all of that time, that's obviously a life sentence. And then that's when the El Rukns basically dissipated, disappeared even, went away, fell off, were no more. And the Black P. Stones then rose back to prominence, illustrating how one individual can impact a gang like that in this sort of culture. Can be the life or the death of an entire gang. Because how does one individual affect whether or not this gang stays strong and in prominence or not? As soon as Jeff Fort went down, they say that if the El Rukns went bad, they, dissipated. The gang was no more. And that was able to allow the Black P. Stones to then elevate once again. That's deep. I don't know. And they said that some people say that Jeff Fort is a hero. Let me know what you think in the comments about Jeff Fort and what you may know. I think I'm going to get into the Larry Hoover situation and the war that he ended up having with Jeff Fort. Stay safe and stay free, people.